Hey everyone, I'm Matt, and welcome to the Good Trouble Show. I am super excited about our show today. Legendary journalist Ross Coulthart is about to join us. But first, do us a solid, hit that thumbs up and subscribe button. Also, leave us a comment. Let us know what you think about this interview. We are also on all podcasting platforms. Just search for The Good Trouble Show with Matt Ford. And finally, maybe most importantly, your financial support enables us to bring you this show with exceptional guests. You can become a Patreon supporter for the price of a monthly Starbucks coffee. You know, we really appreciate your support. I think we've got maybe 15 supporters so far. So anything you can do to help us keep the lights on is most appreciated. And also finally on YouTube, Super Chats are open and a great way to show your financial support. We very much appreciate it. Now, I've been a fan of our next guest for a very long time. He is an Australian author, investigative journalist, filmmaker, and co-host of the Need to Know podcast with Bryce Zabel. He's also been doing some bombshell interviews like this.
When you say crash retrieval, what do you mean?
These are retrieving non-human origin technical vehicles, call it spacecraft if you will. It's probably not the right parlance, but no kidding, non-human, exotic origin vehicles that have either landed or crashed.
We have spacecraft from another species.
We do, yeah.
How many?
Quite a number.
Please welcome our friend from down under, Ross Coulthart. Ross, how are you?
G'day, Matt. It's good to finally talk to you.
Likewise, thank you. I've, like I said offline, I've been a big fan of your work for a very long time. It's really kind of surprising in a way the lack of of really proper coverage of this topic with our the New York Times and all of these folks, and it kind of blows my mind. So people like yourself and others have really been doing great work on this subject, and I know all of us are grateful.
Well, it's not without some damage to my career. I can tell you most of my journalistic colleagues probably think I'm crazy. I mean, it would not be the first time that I've had a tinfoil hat left on my desk at work. People in the media profession do tend to treat this subject with derision and ridicule, but that's starting to change.
I totally agree. Before I really kind of got interested into this subject, most of my work was doing sort of political messaging, political ads and whatnot. And I'm one of those liberals that your mother might warn you about. And anyway, I think it was about in 2020 I decided, I want to start messaging on this UAP topic. And I ran a poll on my Twitter account. I think around that time we were about 50,000 followers and mostly politically active Democrats. And let me just throw in there, I completely treat the UAP issue bipartisan. This thing totally transcends party. But anyway, I ran this poll asking, it's like, well, who is interested in knowing more about UAP? And I got so many DMs from people on Twitter going, are you really going to message on this stuff? And so I know what you mean. Now, I would say that, that the tide has definitely turned, as you say. Now, so this a bit of this interview that we just showed a clip of on News Nation. I mean, that thing really sent shockwaves through DC. Now, I understand that your phone has really kind of been ringing off the hook, right?
I tell you, I've barely slept the last few weeks. It's been nonstop. It's funny, because at the same time that the media, mainstream media, are ignoring this story, I'm kind of hoping in a way they continue to do so, because I've never, as a journalist, one of the great things as a journalist, especially somebody doing what I do, which is to investigate stuff and take a lot longer than, say, a news journo to investigate things. I can take weeks or days to actually start digging. And normally you're worried. You're kind of looking over your shoulder like this, wondering, is there somebody there who's chasing the same yarn? And I'm gobsmacked. I'm absolutely amazed that there is this willful blindness in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the great newspapers of the world to engaging with this subject, because there is an evidential hurdle that any journalist goes through before you start engaging with a topic. And we're way past that prima facie corroborative evidential hurdle with the phenomenon of unidentified anomalous phenomena, not least because just in the last few days, you've got senators, very senior senators in the Congress, admitting that they're taking the allegations of whistleblower David Grusch very, very seriously indeed. And at what point does the mainstream media go, gee, this is a story? Okay, treat it with derision and ridicule if you like, but to do what they're doing, which is to remain willfully blind and to continue to ignore for their audience that this is a legitimate story, I question if there's something more going on here. I'm trained as a journalist to not believe in conspiracy theories and to be intensely skeptical about the idea that there are people meddling with the editorial departments of newspapers or television networks. In my experience, it very, very rarely happens. It's normally neurotic politicians who are worried that their mistresses are going to be named,
Right.
But the reality is that in newsrooms, if somebody tries to tell the editor of a newspaper, you shall not do that story on UFOs, it's normally an incentive for that editor to come and task somebody like me to go out and do it. There's a devil-may-care recklessness in newsrooms that I've always loved being a part of, which is, if some bloody politician tries to tell me not to investigate something, I'm going to go out and investigate it.
Right.
And the thing that shocks me is we are way past now with the comments from senior senators, senior representatives, with the very interview that was done by David Grusch, backed by the Inspector General and backed, to my knowledge, by numerous people in the Congress and numerous people in the Pentagon and the intelligence community. Anybody with any intelligence contacts or defense contacts with half a day's work could figure out that this is a legitimate story. I'm amazed that it's off the front page.
I truly am, and the same thing. I'm not a conspiracy guy. I'm certainly not a journalist. I just play one on TV. But sometimes I wonder, like the New York Times and the Washington Post. This will be, and Ross, I'm sure you would agree. This will be not probably. I think this will definitely be the most significant story, excuse me, in our history, or certainly in the history of the press. And I don't know. I really think, I hope that there's going to come a point where the New York Times and the Washington Post, which has been completely asleep at the wheel, almost a dereliction of journalistic duty, in my opinion. Do you agree? I think that at some point they're going to wake up and go, "Holy, you know what? We missed the boat."
It's funny, a few years ago, I'm a member of a group called ICIJ, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, and it used to be based, I don't know if it still is, out of the Center for Public Integrity in Washington, D.C., and I got invited to a conference, well, it'd be a long while now, and I got to meet one of my heroes, Bob Woodward. And, he, of course, with Carl Bernstein, broke the Watergate story.
Yeah.
But what was fascinating to hear from him was that even when they first started breaking those stories, the Watergate stories, when they started revealing the extent of the criminality of the break-ins at the DNC headquarters, the level of impropriety with illegal campaign financing, illegal spying on American citizens, the Washington Post was out there alone, courageously breaking stories that the rest of the US media were willfully ignoring. And that's where we're at the moment. We're at that phase, this kind of phony war where one section of the media, which is largely online because of the transition that's happened with real journalism, it's happening online mostly now. And sadly, the major newspapers, unfortunately, have become captive to both government and corporate interests. And I say that as somebody who's a free enterprise believer. It's just a simple reality that national security reporters, sadly, on our major newspapers and our major television networks are beholden to their intelligence sources. And if they stray, if they start doing stories about UAPs, I'm sure they would be under some pressure to not tell them. And we're in a very interesting period right now because I suspect that there are editors on the major newspapers and the major TV networks, and I know because I'm starting to get neurotic little phone calls from some of them, and they're asking me, what do you make of this, Ross? Why are you giving this credit? What's going on here? And I'm saying, this is a bloody story. I don't know why you guys aren't covering it. And it's really interesting because I'm sure the same thing happened with Watergate, and I don't put myself anywhere near the level on the podium of somebody like Woodward or Bernstein. They're heroes, and they always will be in investigative journalism. But what defined what they did was the courage to keep on telling stories, even though the rest of the media was willfully putting them nowhere and ignoring them. And it was only the weight of their journalism that eventually led to Congress acting. And really, it was only when Congress started taking the issue seriously that the rest of the media jumped in. And so there's that great saying that those who forget their history are condemned to repeat it. It looks like we're repeating our history.
Well, 100%. And you have to ask yourself that, we supposedly live under a freedom of press, but when you have Pentagon handlers, perhaps OUSDINS and go, telling people like Julian Barnes and others, theoretically, not to run something or here, run this piece with this perspective, that in and of itself jeopardizes the whole concept of freedom of speech, because you have somebody that is dictating to a reporter or a newspaper editor, you need to ignore this conversation or frame it another way, and that's not how a free press, free democracy should run. And then the second point, I'm going to have to disagree with you a little bit. I have said oftentimes that people like yourself, Chris Sharp, Mark von Rennenkamp, always screw up his name, are pursuing this with the rigor of Bob Woodward and the other gentleman I'm brain farting on from the Washington Post. I mean, you guys are seriously, you're doing the hard work. You're not afraid to put it out there. Luckily, we have a News Nation that is stepping up to the plate while everyone is asleep at the wheel. And man, my hat is off to you. I think all of this subject, there's such stigma. It's a team effort. It takes a lot of a lot of bravery to do this. I know everyone is very appreciative of the hard work you guys are doing. Now, I want to get into the Grusch thing and the whistleblowers in general, but I want to dig into, I know a little bit about you, but I'm just curious. So as a journalist, what made you decide, which kind of ties into what we've been talking about, what made you decide to cover this topic, and when did you really get into it?
I've been working, I guess, as an investigative journalist for most of my career, both in television and in newspapers. I trained as a lawyer, as an attorney, and I was always very interested in getting into the nitty-gritty of things. I'm not daunted by processing large amounts of information and analysing it and reaching a conclusion. That's one of the skills you learn as training as a lawyer. And so in my career in newspapers and journalism and television, I was drawn to stories that were taboo. And it struck me as very, very interesting in journalism. There was a taboo, for example, on reporting about suicide.
Wow. Okay.
You were told as a journalist you should never write about suicide because I think actually it's now acknowledged there was a false idea that to write about suicide was to encourage suicide. And so I can remember very early on in my days as a cub newspaper reporter, I wrote about a story where a man had jumped with his children off the Auckland Harbour Bridge in New Zealand, and it was a terribly sad story. But there was a very interesting yarn behind that people weren't telling and weren't exploring because of a taboo. And I was really struck when I came to Australia, and one of the stories that people used to ring the newsroom up about, one of the things I would do is I would be on the desk, the news desk, and a fairly middle-ranking reporter like myself at the time would be asked to take public phone calls and process inquiries from the public with story tips. And a lot of the time, especially after a particular time of night, you would get really strange calls from really wacky people who would make claims about UFOs and aliens and stuff like that. But every now and then you would also get people who would ring up with what sounded like quite creditable information. And I remember talking to the editor of a major newspaper here in Australia and saying, look, let's do a story about this woman who says she saw a UFO hovering over her house. And it was the way in which it was said to me, Roscoe, we don't do bloody UFO stories. We're not into effing flying saucers.
Right, yeah.
And it struck me there is this taboo, there is this stigma. And I guess I'm a historian. I mean, I've done many stories, many books on history. I've written about First World War history, and I was fascinated by looking at a contrarian history of the First World War and how much the media misreported the First World War and essentially became cheerleaders to the war effort in a way that I suspect prolonged the war. And so when it came to UFOs, UAPs, I was intrigued. I finished up working as a reporter with 60 Minutes Australia, and I'd been flying around the world and enjoying doing investigative journalism for that program. And I'd had the ability, I guess, to indulge my curiosity. So I might be in Washington or New York, and because I was reading a lot of books, including Leslie Kane's excellent book and Timothy Good's excellent books, I was fascinated. I was becoming engaged with the subject of UAPs. And what really struck me was that there was a cognitive dissonance between what I was reading in those books, where there were documents, sources on the record, official sources, not just junior sources, in some cases the former head of the CIA, former heads of military departments and agencies, saying this is a real phenomenon. And there were clearly documents evincing that there was a cover-up and that the deliberate decision had been made at the time in the early 1950s of the Robertson panel to essentially mislead and deceive the American public. And it struck me that there was that official narrative that could be derived from sources like the National Archives in your country, CIA's library, and indeed from a variety of public and private sources that was at complete odds with the stigma and the ridicule that was being attached to the subject in other quarters, in media. And it struck me as intellectually dishonest. And I guess I've just been trained to be contrarian and to not accept the truth as it's put, unless I've actually seen the evidence to support it. And the thing that fascinated me was when I started digging, the deeper I got. I remember I asked for a briefing. I approached an intelligence source of mine here in Australia, and I asked for a briefing from the Americans. And I met a guy very close to the Pentagon who came and met me in a hotel bar, and he literally sat down and told me it was all true. That essentially there were non-human intelligences on this planet. And I didn't take it on its face. I didn't say, oh, wow, that must be true. I'll go off and start writing about it.
You didn't do a shot of tequila right then?
I have to admit, I did lie in bed that night looking at the ceiling going, my worldview has just been rocked.
Right, of course.
But I guess for much of the last 5 years, which is how long I've been looking at this pretty solidly now, I've been really struck by how there is this public debate going on where even congressmen, congressional representatives and senators, who I know full well what I know, are going through this public theatrical puppet play where they're going, oh, wow.
I've never heard of this before.
We must investigate this.
Right.
And I'm intrigued because the reality is behind the scenes, people are telling me with absolute certainty that this is a reality.
Totally. It is. I mean, it's really this kind of a dog and pony show. And I want to interject for a second. They always say when you thank a bunch of people, inevitably you're going to leave a couple of names off. And when I was listing the investigative journalists, I of course made that mistake and did not mention Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal. Because I tell you what, if it weren't for their groundbreaking reporting in 2017, I would have never probably become interested in the topic again. So anyway, no affront to them. And again, this is definitely a team effort. But I think I was just kind of making the larger point that the media outlets in general are asleep at the wheel. So so go back to so you're sitting at the bar and this guy is telling you all of this. What was your follow-up question? What was going through your mind at the time? Were you surprised? How did you feel?
I was shocked because, I mean, what I'd done, one of the things that had happened to me was I'd been approached when I was at 60 Minutes Australia by people who were telling me about things that had been going on at the Pine Gap base, which is a joint military installation that Australia operates with the United States, slap bang in the middle of central Australia. And I was being told by people that there'd been sightings of anomalous phenomena, including craft, over Pine Gap. And I just laughed. I have to admit, I giggled. I thought it was nonsense.
Right.
I thought that there must be an explanation that the Americans are testing technology. And I still think that's a possibility, by the way.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
One of the things that I start my book In Plain Sight with is a story of a woman called Annie Farinaccio, who she was dating or a bit sweet on a young American boy who was working at the Harold Holt Naval Station in Northwest Cape, which is way, way up in northwestern Australia near a little town called Exmouth. And they operate what was colloquially sort of referred to, if you like, as a communications facility. And the full purpose of that facility has always been known, but it's never really been explained to the public here in Australia. And the Labor government of the day, way back in the 90s, decided to start making an issue of the fact that what it is essentially the communications station where, when your president launches nuclear missiles, it launches very low frequencies radio waves to communicate with submarines underwater in the Indian Ocean to come to the surface and launch their missiles. I mean, essentially, it's the absolute essential communications link to get messages out to nuclear attack submarines to launch their missiles. And so the phenomenon, or whatever it is, has been taking an interest in Northwest Cape. And I did this in my book, this story of this woman called Annie who quite courageously spoke to me about how she'd seen this craft, essentially this triangular craft hovering over the car that she was in with two military policemen. And she also described a series of events that suggested that the Americans knew full well what this craft was, because a few days after the incident, she was called into the base and interrogated by very senior personnel at the Harold Holt Naval Communications Station from the military community of the American military. And it was clear that people had flown in to hear her interrogation because she knew all the locals, all the Americans who lived in the base, and there were people who she didn't recognise who'd been brought in either from somewhere else in Australia or from internationally. And it's made me realise, because I've had a succession of people contact me since, including military insiders, defence insiders, including former very senior politicians in my country, who've told me that they suspect that the Americans were testing technology in that part of Northwest Cape. And it's interesting because if you look at the timing of it, it was the early 90s when these sightings occurred. And that's about the same period when Groom Lake Area 51 was being made the focus of attention by UFO watchers who were sitting with their long lenses at Groom Lake and capturing images of craft that should not be being captured images of. And so I have a hunch that what's been happening is my government has either unwittingly or wittingly allowed the Americans to test technology in Australian airspace. And it's interesting because the stories still keep on coming in. Even in the last few weeks, I've had sources tell me from Australia that they've seen the same gigantic black triangular craft hovering over their properties in Australia. So something's going on. And that was the beginning, I guess, for me as a journalist, that when I started digging, normally as a journalist, when you're digging into something, you can feel a story die. You can feel your sources drying up and you can feel the leads not going anywhere. With the UAP issue, when I started digging, I've never, ever struck such a golden load as I have with the subject of UAPs.
For sure.
It's the gift that keeps on giving. And you know, I'm exhausted at the moment. I don't mind telling you, I'm absolutely exhausted because I do this as a freelance gig. I don't make money out of it, contrary to what certain slime bags on the internet say.
I know who those are.
I don't ask for money. I don't ask you pay me for the interview. And I'm not generating income out of doing the work that I do on UAPs. I have a day job that I do for network television here in Australia. But the thing that fascinates me is the volume, the wisdom of the crowd out there, the number of people who are saying that they want this issue investigated. I've never, ever had a response like this before. And for the politicians that might be dithering and wondering if the public want to know, by golly, they want to know. People believe that there is a secret, a mystery that is not being revealed to them. And I think the public have long since woken up to the reality that the governments are lying. Either that or they're completely ignorant and stupid. And the simple fact is the public want an answer. And the mainstream media, the legacy media, largely is not doing that for them. And it should be.
I completely agree. What is, because I mean, I'm really relatively new to this topic. I'm not a UFO historian or anything like that. In your experience in studying this whole topic, do you have any theories as to why exactly, at least our government has been covering this up for so long?
I think there are multiple explanations. I think the first is they've participated and connived in what is, I suspect, if David Grusch's allegations are correct, and the allegations of multiple other sources who back him, they've participated in an illegal criminal cover-up. Because ever since your church commission, it's been illegal for the American intelligence community to run intelligence operations against the American people. Now, Mr. Grusch is on record now as saying that a disinformation campaign, an active black intelligence operation has been run against the American people to disinform them. Congress has allegedly been lied to, misled. There have been alleged criminal breaches of the law. Even Mr. Grusch alleges murders. I mean, I just find it gobsmacking that a former senior official of an intelligence community can come out and publicly state on national television in the United States that he is aware of allegations that murders may well have been committed to stop this secret from getting out. And at what stage do so-called serious investigative journalists not start engaging with that issue? That's the thing that really shocks me. What's wrong? What's broken in your country that this isn't being run with? I know that his allegations, Mr. Grusch's allegations, are, if you like, ontologically shocking. They rock our perception of reality. Even I was shocked when David told me some of the things that he told me in the interview. But I have to admit, I've spoken for some time now to people who purport to be part of the legacy UAP crash retrieval reverse engineering program, who back to the hilt what Mr. Grusch is saying. And more importantly, and God bless him for doing so, I was so excited when Senator Marco Rubio came out earlier this week and made his admission. And it's worth repeating again that what he said was people in very senior positions in government with high security clearances have come out making very similar allegations to what David Grusch has alleged, both to the Inspector General under oath and to the Congress under oath. That's the Vice Chairman of the Senate Select Committee for Intelligence. And then Senator Gillibrand, God bless her, on the other side of politics, has also made admissions that she thinks this is sufficiently serious for there to be public hearings. In the House, you've got Mike Gallagher, Representative Mike Gallagher. He's just done the most extraordinary interview. I mean, I'm still processing what he said, but wow. I mean, it's just extraordinary to me. And Tim Burchett, him and Matt Gaetz have acknowledged that they were shown something that they can't talk about at a Florida airbase, which rocked their worldview. What's going on? What's the reason for the lack of curiosity in the rest of the media? And I can understand why the public that are aware of this issue are chafing at the bit to get answers put before the public. I mean, it's ridiculous. What's going on here? And more importantly as well, where's the White House? I mean, exactly. I just do not understand why it's a good idea for the president to stand aside and not say anything while the Congress does what the Congress can do, and this monster gets out of control in multiple committees across the Congress. I mean, I'm a media person. I've seen how scandals snowball. I've seen how things get out of control. And what gets things out of control is when politicians realize they can make political capital out of dirty secrets.
Exactly.
And that's what will happen here. That's what will happen here unless the Democratic government basically realizes that it needs to act and start taking leadership roles to try and control the narrative. Because I know the White House knows. I know they've had briefings.
They do.
I know the National Security Council has been briefed on David Grusch. This is a guy who is extremely senior. His approach to DOPSA, to the Defense Office of Pre-Publication Security Review, would not have gone unnoticed when he said, I want to do an interview to talk about aliens, non-human intelligence. I want to do an interview to talk about crash retrievals of non-human intelligence technology. At what point would the White House not have been informed? You can bet your bottom dollar there would have been a red-hot rocket phone call between the Pentagon and the White House National Security Council to let them know that this interview was imminent. And so why is the president just sitting there waiting for this all just to happen?
It's just crazy. So I want to go back and touch on what you just mentioned about Marco Rubio. I want to play this clip for you and get your reaction.
And so we're trying to gather as much of that information as we can. And the reason why I'm being cautious, not trying to be evasive, but I am trying to be protective of these people. Some of these people still work in the government. And frankly, a lot of them are very fearful of their jobs, fearful of their clearances, fearful of their career. And some, frankly, are fearful of harm coming to them.
Fearful of harm coming to them, threats of physical violence. I trust you've through your sources, have heard similar things.
Yes, I have. Firstly, let me just put on record that there is nothing more disgusting than the low-rent pond scum on social media who have basically come out and denigrated David Grusch for making such statements and suggesting it's all rubbish, it can't possibly be true. You know, David basically flatly alleged, as you know, and you'll recall, the audience that saw my interview will see that on News Nation he told me that people have been threatened with murder, and people allegedly, he suspects, have been murdered to protect this secret. And I can tell you, I've been in touch with people. I've got sources who are claiming, and I believe they are, to be within the legacy crew crash retrieval program, who are looking at the way David Grusch is being treated and waiting to decide whether they come forward. And they are worried because there are already reprisals and threats occurring. People are being presented yet again with NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, and told to sign them and reminded of their security oaths. This is ridiculous because as the National Defense Authorization Act enshrined in legislation, witnesses have the right and indeed the legal responsibility now to come forward to supposedly the ARRO, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, if they choose to trust it. Or if they want, let's just send them to Congress, where the congressional committees can hear their evidence. But there are protections now in place for potential whistleblowers who want to come forward. And at the same time that this is happening, and at the same time that we're being told that these protections exist and that whistleblowers can come forward with impunity, I know for a fact that people are being intimidated and threatened. There are people who are trying to keep this secret. And we're at a very grave moment. And I know it's easy to be flippant when we're talking about UAPs, UFOs, and non-human intelligences. It's so easy to take the piss. It's so easy just to laugh. But what we are talking about here, if David Grusch is telling the truth, and I suspect he is, then there are people who are operating in secret in classified programs that have been illegally and criminally kept secret from the American public, and they have been intimidated with threat of death not to reveal what they know. And this intimidation is continuing. Now, at what point does the sacred role of Congress come into play? I mean, We looked at a time in the 1970s when exactly the same thing occurred. A lot of people who believed in Richard Nixon couldn't bring themselves to believe that a president could commit crimes, that he would spy on the American people, or that he would allow the intelligence services to do such unsanctioned and criminal things. And it wasn't until a public hearing was held in Congress, the Church Commission, that these dreadful revelations came to light. And very slowly, over a period of months, shocking allegations were revealed to the American people. And it led to far-reaching reforms in your intelligence community. And I'm a student of those reforms. And it's absolutely fundamental that the American people were to be protected from intelligence operations by the CIA. I think there's a grave possibility that the CIA has breached that charter yet again. And I think that should be being investigated. And I think that there are very likely CIA operatives who are moving against American people in an endeavour to suppress this story. Lies are being told. Officials are fraudulently misrepresenting to the Congress the truth. It's as simple as that. Do you care about it? Do the American people care about it? I think they should. Because, frankly, your democracy is at stake here. Are you going to let a bunch of unelected generals and intelligence community people and private aerospace executives dictate what you get to know? I think it's such a fundamentally important issue. And if I sound pompous about it, I'm sorry if I do. But I really do. I think we're at a grave moment in American history. Because very much like was happening in the mid-1970s, when the shocking allegations of the crimes of the Nixon administration were being revealed, a lot of people had their head in the sand and were going, oh, this can't possibly be possible. And a lot of other media were basically ignoring the issue and going, Wash Post has got this wrong. Nah, this isn't a story. No, I'm going to ignore this. My sources aren't telling me this. And the reality was it was true. And both sides of politics are contaminated by this cover-up. And frankly, there is an opportunity right now for leadership to be shown, for the political leadership to step forward and start showing spine. Because quite frankly, David Grusch is not the only whistleblower. And if by intimidating and threatening people, those evil people inside the intelligence and defence community think that they can make this issue go away, that's not going to work.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's really, as you say, and it's not being pompous. It's really being quite on point. What kind of democracy do you live in when essentially you have, in a way, a military junta, which is basically a government run by a commission of military folks? So if this sort of thing is going on, which what I've been told by other people as well, is that yes, indeed, that is the case. What kind of democracy is that when there is no congressional oversight? And I think, and you touched on this before, I'm a Biden supporter. Again, I'm a Democrat, but this is a bipartisan issue, and you have to hold your party that you're supporting, you have to hold their feet to the fire. So my question is, where is the Biden administration on this? Why are, the extent of what they've been responding to has just been in the White House press office passing this off to the DOD. The administration has to do the right thing. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, it just blows my mind.
It's really funny. You asked me why I think this is being kept secret, and one of the primary reasons I do think is because they're worried about their crimes being revealed. And there's a whole variety of reasons. But just to go off on a bit of a tangent for a moment, I was watching that great Arnold Schwarzenegger series on Netflix just recently.
I love that show.
And my wife and I were watching it the other night, and we were asking the question of each other, do you think Arnie's going to talk about his mistress, the woman with whom he made a baby? And my wife actually said, I don't think he will. How can he? It's such an embarrassing thing, and it's so far such a laudatory story about Arnie. And then it was wonderful to see because they handled it so well. Arnie basically came on and started talking about this mistake that he'd made, but how much he loves his son and how much he values him being part of his family. And what it was truthfulness. It was speaking the truth. And by golly, you could see, I mean, I was watching it and I was thinking, okay, he's admitted he's made a terrible mistake. He's telling the truth. He's dealing with it. And it was so powerful. And in this case, let's come back to the reasons why they've kept it secret. I think a large part of the reason why, if these allegations are correct, if there really is this crash retrieval and reverse engineering program, I think a large part of the reasons why it was kept secret have their roots in the Cold War. We became aware of things shortly after World War II that were shocking, ontologically shocking to our religious ideas and to the growing tensions with the Soviet Union. There was a fear that revealing the existence of non-human intelligence might very well undermine our ability to win the Cold War against the Soviets, because there's technologies behind these retrieved craft that ought properly to be developed for the benefit of all humankind, but particularly for the benefit of freedom-loving democratic countries like yours and mine. The last thing we want is for these technologies to fall into the hands of bad people, authoritarian regimes like Russia and China. And so I can understand that imperative. And since 1989, since the fall of the Berlin Wall, we've been in an entirely different international situation. And until very recently, we haven't had those tensions. And there was an opportunity, I think, for the truth to be told. And I do think that back in 2016, because of the prospect, as it was seen then, that Hillary Clinton was going to win against Donald Trump, I do think, and my book tells story in my book In Plain Sight, how the evidence is overwhelming that Pentagon generals were conniving with people in the Clinton potential White House administration, including John Podesta, who I think chief of staff, to prepare for the possibility of disclosure in or about 2017. And I think that's why Tom DeLonge's To the Stars Academy was created. And I think that there was the beginning of a very deliberate rollout starting to happen. But this all went back into a box when Donald Trump was elected president. And I think we're now back in that cycle 5-6 years on. And I think now there are, and I'm talking to people privately in the Congress and in Pentagon and intelligence who are telling me that maybe now is the time. But what they're worried about, they're still worried about the prospect of confrontation with Russia. They're still worried about the likelihood of war with China. And they're worried that revealing the existence of this technology, that to even reveal the existence of a non-human intelligence might be a slippery slope to them being compelled to reveal what they know about the technology. And I don't buy that. I don't buy that just because we revealed the existence of the atom bomb when Truman announced it in 1945, we then didn't put out on the not the internet, we didn't put out in newspapers that here's how you make a nuclear bomb. The simple fact is there are things that need to be protected. And I think most people in America would be understanding of the administration's need to keep classified certain bits of technology and information that might prejudice national security. But I do think it's time for the truth to be told. If, as David Grusch alleges, if he, as he's alleging, there is a non-human intelligence engaging with this planet, and if there indeed have been agreements between the United States and those non-human intelligences, then I think it's time to tell the public the truth.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you have to ask yourself, it's like, what is their place to decide that they not tell us what our place is in the universe? It's our right to know, and of course there are things that cannot come out. But this group of 50 or so folks that are keeping this thing locked down, that's not how a democracy runs. Now I want to jump back to what you had said earlier, which I thought was significant, that you are hearing that whistleblowers, as part of that harassment, are being asked to sign a new NDA. Did I catch that right? And have you heard anything as far as, is the wording any different? Is it more of just a reminder of, hey, you better not talk? This is the first I've ever heard of this.
I'm not going into specifics because I don't want to compromise sources, but what I am prepared to say is that I know people are being threatened to sign new NDAs.
Unbelievable.
And if you recall, it's part of the National Defence Authorisation Act that all such NDAs have to be disclosed to the Congress, to the RO. So we've got this ridiculous situation where clearly, I believe, there are people inside the intelligence community who are operating in direct contradiction to the stated intention of the Congress. And that's serious. I mean, that's criminality. That's criminal behaviour by intelligence operatives going around intimidating and threatening people. I mean, I'm sitting here knowing that I'm in contact with people, and I've been talking to David Grusch, obviously, for some time, and he's one of multiple people who are aware of what the public wants to know. And they're worried. They're worried that there is a deliberate attempt to frustrate the good intentions of good people in the Congress. And the big question is the Congress going to let them get away with that?
And
I think they might. I still think it's possible that this might all be put back into a box.
That would truly be a tragedy. Now, in your recent appearance on News Nation, you spoke about that there have been hearings about this going a couple of years back. I think Senator Rubio also touched on that. What are you hearing? And then also about that, and then also, have you heard any sort of approximation of how many new whistleblowers are coming forward?
Okay, let's talk firstly about David Grusch, because one of the things I think people fail to understand, and it hasn't been very well communicated in a lot of the media coverage, and certainly the mainstream media coverage that keeps on bleating this tired line that there is no evidence, and this is coming from the debunkers as well. They fail to understand. They fail to understand the significance of the Inspector General of the intelligence community's referral to Congress. Firstly, there's been a canard, a bullshit line that essentially the Inspector General was only validating Grusch's findings of or allegations of reprisal and harassment, and that there was no reflection at all by the Inspector General on the credibility of his claims about a crash retrieval reverse engineering program. That is untrue, categorically. I know it's untrue. I know that not only did David Grusch give allegations to the Inspector General detailing the existence of the reverse engineering crash retrieval program, as a consequence of his evidence, and understand this well, other witnesses were called by the Inspector General. And I know that, I'm not sure the number, I suspect it's around 6, testified on Mr. Grusch's behalf. And I don't think Mr. Grusch is even aware of who all those people are. But my other sources are telling me that there was an abundance of evidence given to the Inspector General of the intelligence community that more than verified not only the reprisals that had been taken against Mr. Grusch, but also the existence of a secret crash retrieval and reverse engineering program. And it was on that basis that the Inspector General then referred the matter as urgent. I can hear
All
you.
right.
Is that better?
Yeah, now we're better.
No, I'm sorry, I don't want to sound paranoid, but isn't it interesting that the very moment that I'm telling you why this issue, it needs to be taken so seriously, is because not only is Mr. Grusch making these claims to the Inspector General, the point that I was making was that it was multiple corroborative witnesses were giving evidence under oath in secret to the Inspector General who corroborated Mr. Grusch's claims, not only of reprisal, but also of the existence of a crash retrieval reverse engineering program. And I've gone back and double-checked that with my sources, and I am abundantly clear that there is multiple corroborative evidence to back Mr. Grusch's claims, not only of reprisal, but also of the existence. They testified under oath to the existence of a crash retrieval reverse engineering program. And then what happened was, because it was referred to the Congress as credible and urgent, the congressional committees, the House Permanent Select Committee for Intelligence and also the Senate Select Committee for Intelligence, then began their investigations. And contemporaneously with the approach that David Grusch made, it emerged, and I learned this not too long ago, but I learned that there have been secret hearings in the Congress now for at least 2 years, where witnesses have come forward with evidence of the crash retrieval program. So when you see these congressmen and senators appearing on television and saying, we're going to get to the bottom of this, we're very concerned to analyse this and find out the truth of this stuff, I know for a fact that their committees have actually heard this evidence, and there are transcripts available of which they can apprise themselves, where the witnesses have given full evidence under oath and testified to not only the existence of the program, but the alleged location of the technology, the craft, the name of the people running the program, how it's coordinated, how it's hidden, the code names, locations, everything. This has been known for some time.
I agree. I think the other thing Congress needs to look into is who exactly keeps jacking with my audio setup on the show. It's funny. I had Chris Sharp on here the other day, and this helicopter was flying around, and my wife. I get this text from my wife going, "There's this black helicopter. You should come look at it." And sure as hell, about 5 minutes later, it wasn't the same thing, but the audio took a crash, and the show was 30 minutes late. So, Senate Armed Services Committee, please look into what's going on with the audio at the Good Trouble Show. Somebody's clearly jacking with us. Maybe it's Moultrie or Go. I have no idea. I'm sure it's one of the two. So back to serious conversation. I know Lou Elizondo has spoken about this a bit. Do you think that there should be amnesty for people that have been involved in lying to Congress and covering this up?
Matt, I think I was the first to suggest that, actually. I've been saying for some time that when I was a journalist here in Australia, I went to South Africa, and I was privileged to be able to see the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in operation in South Africa. And to me, I followed the apartheid crimes of the apartheid regime and the imprisonment of Nelson Mandela for many years as a young student. And it, I guess, molded my political activism, my sense of political and outrage. And what was interesting was to see the forgiveness that was manifested by Nelson Mandela when he came into power in South Africa. And instead of calling for criminal prosecutions, which could have fragmented the country, what he called for was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where in return for an amnesty and for telling the truth under oath in full vision of the families whose members of the family they'd murdered, there were members of the South African Security Service, BOSS, who testified. And I remember I sat through one of those moments, and it was incredibly powerful, because literally you had a guy who'd murdered and tortured a young man because he was a member of the African National Congress, and his family was sitting in the room weeping, hearing his testimony. But it was such a healing moment, because this person basically testified and indeed apologized. And I think it's too serious for this. If this is true, if these allegations are true, if we're not the victim of a massive disinformation program, and if it really is the case that there is a huge cover-up going on of a huge crash retrieval program, I think we should know, and the only way to bring it out into the public is to have some kind of Truth and Reconciliation Commission where people are compelled to testify in return for the promise of an amnesty. And so long as they tell the full truth and don't try and lie and reveal all, I think that's a really good way to healing. I don't see any merit at all in prosecuting people criminally, but I do think that if people continue to lie and engineer a cover-up beyond the point of those amnesties, then I think they should be hung, drawn and quartered. You know, I think in my book I say that they should be tarred and feathered and tied to the back of a Humvee and dragged around Washington, D.C. I think that there's a moment in history that's going to come where people are given the opportunity to tell the truth. And if they lie, they should be excoriated and shown up publicly for the liars that they are. But if they're willing to come forward and explain why they kept this secret, and if they're willing to come forward and admit the crimes and the illegalities that they've committed, I do think there's strong merit in giving them an amnesty.
I think, and I do agree. I think that may be the one way. I'm sure to smoke these people out. I definitely think that what you touched on earlier, as far as fear of prosecution. I mean, that self-preservation. That's a pretty strong. It's a pretty strong human reflex. These folks that have engaged in the physical threats of violence. And perhaps acted on it, in my opinion, I think those folks should be locked away for life. And they are definitely pond scum. Now, speaking of pond scum, one of the criticisms that a couple of our not so favorite people have leveled against David Grusch is his admission or revelation that he is on the spectrum. And you had Stephen Greenstreet and someone else that I won't name that essentially said that because he's autistic, he's not a fully functioning human and can easily be snowed under and all of this stuff, which is, I think, probably the most disgusting thing I've ever seen anybody say. And just want to get your thoughts on that.
There is on the internet right now a cadre of weak and pathetic people who are prepared to resort to the lowest standards in order to push a contrarian line that they think generates them clickbait. They are pathetic, weak, insipid, downright evil people, because what they're doing is pushing a false narrative, wittingly or unwittingly, that perpetuates what I suspect is a cover-up. And nothing is more despicable than to point out somebody's neurodiversity and to seize upon it as an excuse to attack their credibility. What a low-rent grub act to do such a thing. I have friends who are neurodiverse, and some of them work in the intelligence world. One of them is David Grusch. He's brilliant. And the reason why he's such a good intelligence officer is because of his neurodiversity. I can tell you, especially the intelligence community values people with his type of Asperger's syndrome. It's incredibly valuable because they can see patterns, and often they find it incredibly difficult to live comfortably unless they can resolve dissonance in those patterns. They like to get to the bottom of a mystery. He's exactly the sort of guy that you want chasing this story. And the funny thing about it is, way back when he was on the UAP task force, he was tasked to proactively go out and investigate and find out the truth of claims that there was a secret program involving UAP crash retrievals. And to him, it just seemed preposterous. It just seemed crazy, the idea that there could possibly be such a secret program out there that he didn't know of when he had TSSCI clearances, compartmented clearances. He had access to over 2,000 special access programs, including waived, unacknowledged special access programs, secrets that only the president is allowed to know. And yet he wasn't privy until he started proactively digging. And the reason why he was so good at it is precisely because of his neurodiversity. What sort of a world do we live in when scumbags would feel that they could somehow garner popularity on the net by seizing on somebody's neurodiversity and using it for political advantage? Ugh, I mean, I just find such people despicable. I just don't understand why we even give them credit. And I refuse to name them, but they should be ashamed of themselves. And indeed, I think people should pry more into the backgrounds of those people. At least one of those people I know has worked in the past for a propaganda section of either the State Department or the Pentagon. He also has despicable statements that he's made on Twitter and Reddit about women and people of colour. And I just think it's a disgrace. Why do we give these people the time of day? Why even acknowledge that they exist? They're irrelevant, and they will soon be made irrelevant as it becomes increasingly clear that the Congress is taking this really seriously. I think what happens in social media is some people get far too much power just because they're a voice. And they see that they can generate clickbait by commenting about things. And if they take a contrarian position, often naive people on social media feel that they have to engage with them. My view is don't give them air. As you say, they're pond scum. Ignore them.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's really, I really in ways feel worse for them that they would stoop to that level and behave that way in their life towards folks. But I do think it is a fair question because we spoke about this earlier. It's like, Ross, if let's say come on my show and all you want to talk about is the Loch Ness Monster, you're like, yeah, Loch Ness Monster is totally real. I didn't believe it, or I don't believe it. I do. But I would say, Ross, go knock yourself out. Go to Loch Ness, look for the thing, have fun. Next time you're in LA, let's grab a beer. I wouldn't spend all of my time, and face it, the most precious commodity we as humans have is our time. I wouldn't spend all of my time ragging on Ross Coulthart because he's into the Loch Ness Monster. And so the question I then ask, then what is their motivation? The Mick Wests of the world and Stephen Greenstreet and others that are, I think, on well, I don't even want to say it, but you begin to wonder, are they just doing this for free? Maybe, I don't know, maybe the New York Post pays a ton of money for their journalist to tweet about, tweet about UFOs. But yeah, And the only thing I can think about, I'm just curious what you think, is is this like the only way of tearing down Grusch? Like when somebody says to you, how do you know Grusch is credible? What is your response?
Well, I find it very interesting that we're now getting towards a month, Matt, since David went public with me on News Nation and with Leslie and Ralph in The Debrief. And in that time, there has been no significant attempt by the Pentagon to in any way creditably dispute his allegations. In fact, the only comment that we've had from Susan Goh is a very qualified denial pertaining to knowledge of extraterrestrial intelligence engaging with this planet known by Arrow. And I think a lot of the responses from the Pentagon have been very heavily qualified to only make it clear that they're responding on behalf of Arrow, which is the Pentagon's UAP investigation body. And there are two things you need to bear in mind and know about that body. Firstly, the legislation originally required that the Arrow body, that the Pentagon's UAP investigation body, be answerable to the Secretary for Defense, not to USDI, not to the Office of the Undersecretary for Defense Intelligence. It's that very office that Lou Elizondo himself has said is responsible for the cover-up. So I'm not going to dignify these people that are acting as shills for the Pentagon. I'm only speculating whether they're being supported in any way by the Pentagon in their specious allegations. But I don't think we should give them air. I think we should ignore them and move on. I don't know their motivations. But what I do think is what they're doing is downright improper and wrong, because they're essentially resorting to an ad hominem attack. Rather than actually dealing with the issues, they're choosing to attack somebody, of all things, for their neurodiversity. What a low act. What a grub act, as we say in Australia. Honestly, I don't want to deal with people like that. We don't have to, and I'm not planning to. I refuse to name them by name, and I'd rather just move on and not even discuss them.
Yeah, I don't even consider these folks journalists, and thank God we have people like yourself doing this work. Now, speaking as a journalist, and I say I'm not a journalist, I'm just podcast host or whatever. But one of the things I understand that is like a sort of big no-no is you don't want to scoop anyone's story. Now, the David Grusch thing, that was a huge get for you, but. I have to tell you, I actually scooped you. And
how did you scoop me?
There is a bigger whistleblower that, much like yourself, did a little pre-tape interview. It wasn't on News Nation; it was on my show. But this guy, I think you might be surprised. He was amazing. Our Orb there. So he didn't have a name, but his name was Mr. Orb. And I understand too that you actually.
And so we're trying to gather as much of that information as we can. And the reason why I'm being cautious, I'm not trying to be evasive, but I am trying to be protective of these people. Some of these people still work in the government.
You actually know this guy as well.
Fearful of their jobs, fearful of their clearances, fearful of their career, and some frankly are fearful of harm coming.
Anyway, that's what happens when you have a one-man technical operation. But anyway, so I just thought that was funny. That actually, there's this guy named Uplifting Tweets that comes up with these just fantastic sort of images. But I love that of. You doing a little barbecuing there with the orb and the little flying saucer in the background.
Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. Sorry.
No, it's funny actually because I'll tell you that when I did that story last year for Channel 7 Australia, and we interviewed a guy called Jim Marlin in Texas about the metal sphere. Honestly, the shills that we've discussed previously, the people who will not be named, who are the apologists for the gatekeepers, they immediately leapt on this, saying, "Oh, Coulthart's giving credit to some loony guy in Texas." And hilariously, I just can't help but gloating about the fact that, even now, in testimony to the Congress, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, the head of ARROW, the head of the Pentagon's UAP investigation office, has acknowledged that one continuing mystery that continues to vex and fascinate their investigators are these, quote, metallic spheres that are being seen all over the world by witnesses that are doing anomalous things. And it's interesting because a lot of people are impatiently demanding that we sort of account to them for what we've been able to dig up on the metallic spheres. And all in good time. When I'm good and ready, we'll report. But we're not going to be badgered or bullied into giving a result until we're absolutely 100% about the conclusions that we can reach. But I can tell you, I've been approached from all over the world after having the piss taken out of me last year for doing that story and giving credit to a guy in Texas. Clearly, I knew a lot more than I was letting on. And clearly, a lot of people now are coming forward to me with information. And I think at some stage, we'll be able to reveal what we know.
I love that. So, Ross, we really appreciate your time. I want to get to some user questions. Firstly, I want to thank. We've had some really generous super chats. We'll get to those first. So, Carlos, thank you for your super chat. And his question: don't you think 180 days is too much time for contractors to clean most evidence of crafts and the reverse engineering? Excellent job, Ross. I admire your courage. Carlos Barboza from Uruguay.
I do have a worry about the duration of time that is passing before the aerospace companies have to come forward to reveal the technology that they either do or don't have. I will tell you that I am aware of at least one aerospace company that is actively making moves to try to divest itself, allegedly, of one craft that it possesses.
Wow, okay.
And if you think about it, think about the legal implications. Have a read of the legislation. If you're an aerospace company and you've divested yourself of an object that you've had possession of for 60 or 70 years, are you then legally obliged to reveal that all this time you've secretly been holding it? This is the really interesting thing is I think that what's happening at the moment inside private aerospace, and this is why there's a need, frankly, for the government to take leadership on this, because this could get really messy. Because one of the other issues, Matt, I know for a fact is one of IP. As a lawyer, I was trained in intellectual property. It's an area I take a great interest in. And I do think that if a firm, for example, was vested by the government 50, 60, 70 years ago, let's just say these allegations are correct, and a private aerospace company was gifted technology 50, 60, 70 years ago, and that technology is still in their possession and they've been spending billions of dollars trying to develop it. On what basis can the government assert any kind of property right?
Right.
I'm on their side. I mean, frankly, if you're an aerospace company and you were given this, there was no commercial contract signed between you and the government at the time, and I'm told there wasn't. And essentially, if all you're doing is quietly accounting every now and then to some faceless general for what you're up to and showing them the latest tests of the technology, on what legal basis can the state assert any kind of property right over that technology? And moreover, if, as I understand, there have been private aerospace companies that have done retrievals of their own involving private military contractors without government involvement, on what legal basis can the government dictate to a private corporation that it has any right to know about that intellectual property?
Very fair points.
I think these are the issues. This is why this is a big issue. And one of the dynamics as well that's going on behind the scenes here is, I know because I've been approached by some of them, there are people, especially in Silicon Valley, who are aware of the alleged vesting of technology in certain aerospace companies, including Lockheed Martin, by the way. Let's not beat around the bush. Let's name them Lockheed Martin.
Right, yeah.
And people are aware of the fact that companies like Lockheed Martin were vested technology 60, 70 years ago. And they're pissed. They're angry because why should the government be giving favourable treatment to a private corporation?
Right.
There is a very good argument that the government has acted improperly by giving exclusive technology use to an individual corporation that, if we're to accept the truth of what is being asserted by some of these witnesses, has not been adequately scientifically investigated. So if they've failed to do their job, these private corporations, if they've completely failed to achieve the breakthroughs in this technology, why the fuck are we letting them continue to hold on to it? And part of the problem is that the government didn't make commercial agreements, I'm told. There are no contracts. There's nothing to regulate this. So this is the growing issue. This is what's vexing people at the level of the National Security Council, because I know there are private conversations taking place between private aerospace companies and senior people in government where they're saying, hold off, guys, what right have you got to tell us what to do with our technology? And I think they've got a point.
I think they do too. Another super chat question from Gandalf. Ross, shouldn't the revised legislation also try to go after the illegal novel private defense held classification scheme put in place after the, quote, program very nearly got outed several years back?
That's the question?
Yes, yeah. So I'm trying to figure it out.
I think they are. I think they are going after that. I mean, my understanding is that the program was very nearly revealed by an audit that was done by the Government Accounting Office, the GAO, back in the 1970s, and that a large part of the program was moved into private enterprise under the Nixon administration. Funny that. And the DOE in particular, the Department of Energy, divested itself of a lot of its physical assets and put them into the control of private aerospace. And what I've been spending a lot of time trying to do is to find out whether there are contracts, because being a contract lawyer by training, I look for bits of paper. The first thing any reasonable person would do when they're trying to assess whether or not there is a legal obligation on private aerospace companies to come forward with this information is look for contracts. And I know contracts have been looked for inside the Pentagon and the intelligence community to see what agreements were made, if any, at the time when these objects were handed over. And whilst I know there are records recording a handover of objects, I know for a fact that there is no legal paperwork that regulates what happens to the intellectual property in those objects when they were handed over. And similarly with the classification system, to answer more specifically the question that Gandalf poses, great name by the way, the simple fact is that my understanding is that the part of the investigations do involve an assessment of the illegalities, the alleged illegalities of breaches of the classification security protocols by the way in which this was hidden and continued to be hidden after attempts by government agencies to bring it under accountability many decades ago.
Lockheed Martin. Okay, uplifting. Stoned Ape. Thank you very much for the super chat donation. Same Winston Smith, Jeff Wynn. Thank you so much. Let's see, another question here from The Nature of Wild Things. What is your best guess, Ross, on the motivations of the NHI?
I have no bloody idea. None at all. I mean, the thing that worries me most of all about what Dave's told me in interview is that on occasion, a species of NHI has acted malevolently towards human beings, and that has involved hurting and killing humans. So what their motivations are, I do not know. I would be speculating. If they're real, let's always qualify this. If they're real, if there really is a non-human intelligence that's engaging with this planet, if what David Grusch is saying is correct, and I suspect he's telling the truth, then I don't think the full motivations of that species or that NHI will be revealed unless and until we have a full public accounting from the government. Maybe we just don't know. We may not.
Another super chat question. Thank you. Devarin Dispatch, I'm sure I'm butchering that there. The House Intelligence Committee member, Mr. Hines, spoke with Robert Moultrie, who assured him that the DOD looked, this is so freaking funny, Ronald Moultrie, who assured him that the DOD looked and found no credible evidence of recently of Grusch's claims. Of course, Hines says he is skeptical. Skeptical as a lawmaker there. Yeah, I'm sure Moultrie said they don't have anything. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, well, this is why USDI, the Office of the Undersecretary for Defence Intelligence, should not be regulating the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. Because if what David Grusch is saying is true, then Ron Moultrie is lying, if that's the case. So this is why the Congress needs to investigate. This is why we need to get to the bottom of this, because David Grusch is risking prosecution. He's risking jail if he's committed perjury by giving evidence under oath that is untrue. He's backed his claims under oath to both the Congress, to two select committees in the Congress, and also to the Inspector General. And moreover, the Inspector General has found his allegations to be credible. So somebody's lying. This is why this needs to be investigated. We 100%. Have prima facie on the evidence that somebody is lying. And they're not just lying about, whether or not the government made 200,000 widgets or 2 million widgets last year. They're lying about probably the most fundamental secret in human history. If David Grusch is telling the truth, this is the biggest story in human history. If he's telling the truth, this has been improperly and criminally withheld from the knowledge of not just the American public, but the world for much of the last 80, 90 years. It's been almost a century-long cover-up. What do they know? I mean, if this is true, what do they know that's stopping them from revealing the truth? Because we're now in a position where it's no longer tenable for public officials like Ronald Moultrie to just dismissively assert that there is no extraterrestrial evidence, there's no engagement of ETs with this planet. Clearly, we have now multiple admissions from multiple senior public officials, including David Grusch, a former official, asserting that there is evidence to suggest that something very, very unusual is going on. At what stage does curiosity get engaged?
Very good point. Surface level, thank you for the super chat. Does Ross think that a lot of old conspiracy theories like abductions have to be reevaluated if Grusch's claims prove to be true? Well, that's a doozy.
Again, I just don't know.
Yeah.
I really don't know. I didn't go there with Dave Grusch, and I just don't know. I spoke as recently as earlier this morning to a woman who told me a harrowing story about how, as a 12-year-old girl, she saw a craft above her house. Everybody else on the road and on the family house was frozen, and she found herself in a craft. And, it's an amazing story. But the difficulty I have as a journalist is I'm not being dismissive of people who assert that they've suffered abductions or, indeed worse, mutilations or sexual abductions in some kind. It's just impossible to investigate. There's no corroborative witnesses. There's no way of being able to investigate it. I sure as hell hope it's not true. But the thing that alarms me is we now have David Grusch on the record admitting to me that he's aware that people have been hurt and killed by a non-human intelligence. We need to get to the bottom of this. This is again why this needs to be investigated. Grusch is calling the bluff of people like Ron Moultrie, who are flatly asserting that there is no such evidence of NHI engaging with this planet. Prove it. As Michio Kaku has said, we now have a reversal of the onus of proof. Sufficient evidence has now been presented that really government and officials need to put up or shut up and let the truth be told.
Absolutely. And speaking of Moultrie, so we know Ronald Moultrie and Dave Taylor installed Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick as the head of AARO. Do you think Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick is the right man for the job?
Look, sadly, no. I think he's displayed apprehended bias in the way he conducts himself. I don't think, on the basis of what I know, he's been as candid as he should be with the Congress about what I know he's been briefed. Even David Grusch has admitted to me that he circumvented going to AARO because he didn't trust AARO. He didn't trust Sean Kirkpatrick. He went directly to the Congress and the Inspector General. And the reason he did that was because he did not have faith that his allegations would be properly investigated. We've got a situation now where the legislation mandates that AARO should be being administered and answerable to the Secretary of Defence. Instead, it's being kept within the office of the Undersecretary of Defence Intelligence and Security, which is the very agency inside the Pentagon that Lou Elizondo and others are telling me is responsible for part of the cover-up. So why? And moreover, at what point does this twig the curiosity of lazy national security reporters who don't recognise yet that it's a story?
I couldn't agree more. It's I'm sure he's a very nice man. Obviously, he's very, very smart. But if you're prosecuting a crime, you don't put a scientist as the prosecutor in a case and drum up a bunch of peer-reviewed papers. Real quick, A-Rod, thank you very much for your donation. Ron as well, and Ross, thank you so much for your time. So I've decided next time I'm gonna be much better prepared for the interview. So the next time that Ronald Moultrie or Susan Go are interfering with my technical setup, I'm going to have this nice sign here. I'm going to put up OUSDI jamming. Please stand by. And so people know I'll do a better job making a nicer graphic that I can pop back up next time that they decide to mess with our interview. But you know what? You're an absolute pro. You hung out and we did a little sign language and stuff. But Ross, really, I just thank you so much. You're a hero to me. And inspirational to so many people in the work that you're doing on this topic, and just your journalistic courage that unfortunately a lot of people just don't have. And we're very, very lucky. So how can, real quick, you have this fantastic show, A Need to Know, with Bryce Grable, if I'm saying that correctly. How can we find you?
Bryce Sable, www.needtoknow.today.
Excellent. And then you also have a book.
I've also written a book called, In Plain Sight, which was published 2 years ago, and it's being re-released. A new edition's coming out in September in the United States, and that'll be on the shelves late August, early September.
Excellent. Well, fantastic. I'm going to send you a copy of this in case on your next podcast you experience jamming of your technical equipment, so you'll be prepared as well. Ross Coulthart, thank you very much for joining us, and we appreciate your time and coming on our show.
Matt, thank you. And look, can I just say very quickly, what's happening at the moment in the media is it's being destroyed by Google and all of the other online entities that are sucking up all the advertising revenue. And what's happening is shows like yours and mine, Need to Know, are basically filling that void. You're seeing a new type of journalism online that's doing the work that should have been being done by the mainstream media. So hats off to you hats off to you as well for doing this.
Thank you. It's a team effort. I tell you what, it's a team effort. And as I always say, this is a nonpartisan issue. Doesn't matter if you're right on the fence, left on the fence. Everyone, what everyone must do is contact their lawmaker, demand transparency, demand accountability on what is going on. Our democracy depends on it. Ross, thank you very much. Look forward to meeting you in person one day and having a beer. And thanks again, and we'll see you soon.